Welcome to the Cyber Talent Series, where we explore how organizations are closing the skills gaps, accelerating onboarding, and building high-performance cybersecurity teams. My name is Phoebe DeVito. I'm joined by my co-host, Thomas Rogers, and today we are talking with Rear Admiral John Mauger. So welcome, John.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Phoebe. It's really a pleasure.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, we can just dive right in. John, can you tell us about yourself and what you do now?
Yeah, sure thing. So I had the great pleasure of serving the nation for almost 4 decades. I served as a officer in the Coast Guard, went to the Coast Guard Academy, and then went on and served for 33 years on active duty. And during that time, I got to do many wonderful things, but a constant thread throughout my career was really the integration of new technology and what that meant for both the service and for the industry that we work with. Since retiring now, I run a small consulting company where I help folks that are working in the maritime industry or in cybersecurity to understand the challenges and risks that this new technology brings. So it's really a pleasure to be with you guys today.
Awesome. No, it's so great. Obviously, you've had such a remarkable career, and you just touched on some of the roles that you had. I'm curious if when you look back, there's specific roles or moments you can pick out that really shaped your approach to leadership specifically in cybersecurity.
Yeah, thanks. I had a chance to start thinking about what cybersecurity meant in the maritime space in kind of the 2008, 2009 time period. I was working as an assistant on the Bush-Obama transition and really helping the outgoing Secretary of Homeland Security and the incoming Secretary of Homeland Security to understand the different risks that the nation was facing and how we were going to account for it. Then I had the benefit to go to school a couple of years later at the National Defense University. And I think that those early years were pretty foundational in helping me really understand the nature of the challenge that we were facing, both as a country and then as a maritime industry as well. And help me to start putting together some of the plans along with many other talented folks that would ultimately lead to the Coast Guard cyber force that we have today and the regulations that have recently been promulgated to secure the maritime industry.
That's super cool. I think a lot more of the private sector companies are taking more of a public sector approach to cyber readiness probably than they were earlier in your career. What type of things do you think private sector companies can learn from trying to build for readiness and resilience in the workforce?
Yeah, I think there's a number of different things that folks can learn. First and foremost, as we were working through this during some of the earlier years, there was really a need to recognize that this isn't a back office admin function that you worry about. Your email goes down. Hey, call the IT guys, get them out of the closet and get them to fix it and get email back up and running. And then just go on. It's an operational imperative for the Department of Defense, for the Coast Guard, for many government agencies across the country. And it's an operational imperative for many companies too that rely on this seamless flow of information, going across their networks all the time. And so then what does that mean? You got to have the people, you got to have the talent, you got to have the know-how to be able to effectively deal with this.
So once you get down to the people layer, which is, an area where we think about a lot, we believe, similar to what you just said, cyber is like an enabler for all the business. It's not like the thing that you do just so you can get back to the real work. It helps you do everything you need to do. So, but when you get to that people layer, how what have you seen that's worked from a management perspective? As a people manager, how do you get people to the places they need to be to make sure that obviously you're going to look at it organizationally from the top layer, are we ready to respond? But you got to do it from bottoms up too. So how do you think about that?
Absolutely. I think about it in a couple of different ways, Thomas. First and foremost, if I was talking to CEOs today, the number one thing that I tell them is nobody cares more about your mission than you do. And I think that's really important to kind of start the conversation, because I think there's a lot of people that think that they can just outsource the risk management for cybersecurity to other providers. And there's wonderful providers out there. But at the end of the day, nobody cares more about your mission than you do. And so that means you're going to have your own people involved in understanding the nature of the risks and helping to mitigate them. And then you're going to have to train and develop those people. You're going to want to retain those people. And so it really becomes a whole spectrum of how do you align your training, your development, your retention incentives, all that stuff to make sure that they have the right training, the right development, the right incentives to get after the problem. We saw this very acutely during my time as the director of training and exercises at U.S. Cyber Command from 2018 to 2020. And happy to share some of those stories with you as well.
Yeah, can you share some now? Would love to hear any specifics you have to talk about there.
I think this was another really formative period for me, certainly a formative period for how we as a nation train, operate, fight in cyberspace today. But let me take you back to that. And so in 2018, General Nakasone came in as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, and he had been working, this problem set for more than a decade as he progressed through the ranks, and he had looked at it through a bunch of different angles. And he had determined that the current force when he took over in 2018 was really designed to be like a firehouse, a reactive force. Somebody's broken into the networks. Let's, go out, mobilize to the site, clean up what we need to clean up, restore the network, and then go back to the firehouse. And that's a useful model, but it's a very reactive and it's a very episodic model. And what he wanted to do was create a force that was operating and fighting in cyberspace every day. And so it was a very proactive model. And so what did that mean? We had to absolutely change everything that we were doing about the training and the development and the retention of the folks that were fighting in that force, because there wasn't a lot of time when they were just sitting around waiting for something to happen. And so they would spend about a year and a half just sitting in the classroom, working through training and development. But before they could even get in the classroom, they generally spent about another year just waiting to get their security clearance done. And so now you had about their first 2.5 years of service, and they're just in a really training capacity. And we wanted to turn that on end and really turn it into a learn, do, repeat model. At the same time, we augmented their classroom training with some really high-end, exquisite exercises. But these are really super episodic. I think you guys know what it takes to put on a capture the flag event. And they're really super effective at building teams and really trying to, get into a deep understanding. But when it only happens once a year, or when it only happens once, every couple of months, you quickly lose the learning that you've gotten from that. And so what we needed at U.S. Cyber Command was a platform that could organize that training for us, that could provide a space where people could conduct exercises on a daily or hourly basis, that took some of all that great content that we had and put it into a platform that could guide that training path.
Really cool. So how'd you, I'm going to keep going on this because this is just so interesting. So like once people actually got, through and onboarded into the role, you mentioned learn, do. I'm sure once they actually got into their roles, they were probably very busy. How did you balance that with like continuous development? But yeah, you kind of have to keep watering the soil as it goes on. But yeah, how'd you balance that?
Yeah, absolutely. It starts with an assessment, right? And then put them in through that developmental experience and that strength building, and then continue to reassess them, evaluate their progress, and continue to move them on. It also then allows you to move folks at the pace at which they're comfortable with. One of the interesting things when we set up a cyber force within the Coast Guard, what we wanted to do was make sure that we were bringing people into the force that understood what the Coast Guard was. And so we did an open recruiting call from across service members that had already had time in service, that they understood what our mission was. And we wanted to evaluate, what their skills were. What did we find? We found that cooks ended up being great cyber war fighters, just because this was things that they were interested in and they could pass the assessment. Some of them could pass the assessments and do really well. And so, that idea that everybody progresses at a different rate and everybody brings something different to the table is really important in building a customized training and development portfolio. But to get back to your question, assess where folks are at, put them through exercises that are oriented towards whatever your goals and developmental needs are, and then reassess where they're at and repeat and repeat and repeat, because the world's constantly changing.
I mean, that sounds great. I'm sure logistically really challenging, because I don't know how many people, maybe you could share how many people are a part of this program, but to create like a customized skill development plan for everyone had to have been a massive effort. So yeah, what was the scale, and how'd you do that?
Yeah, we certainly didn't get there by the time that I left U.S. Cyber Command, and it continues to be an evolutionary developmental process. It'll get a little bit wonky because the services themselves, they're actually responsible for developing the detailed training plans for each of their service and their service members according to their needs. But what we did at U.S. Cyber Command was set the broad standards of, hey, these are the different types of roles that we need. These are the qualifications for each one. And then put together a platform that could be that learning management system for it, and also host, some of that rich content that we had developed. This is an area, this thing that we haven't talked about yet, the content and the experience that folks get through on-demand training. It's only as good as that content is. I think of a funny story when my son was growing up. My son's now 21. And I cleared with him that I was going to tell this story, but I can make fun of myself too here in a sec. But he was grew up with the Wii, and he was an amazing Wii bowler. He'd score like 275, maybe 300 a couple of times. And I took him out to go bowling at the bowling lane in town, and he was so upset that he couldn't break 100. And he's like, "Dad, but I'm so amazing," And so what did we learn from this? We learned that virtual training that he got, he knew the rules, he understood how to play the game, he knew what was going on, but it in no way prepared him for the skills of actually bowling in the real world. And so it's an example of good online training, but not necessarily effective in building the skills. For me, I can say the same thing about rock guitar. As he got a little bit older, he and I jammed out on rock guitar. I thought I was going to go live. I realized I picked up a guitar, and everything I learned in rock guitar or rock band had absolutely no translation to actually playing a guitar and being in a real rock band.
If only real guitars just had those little colored buttons. How much simpler life would be.
So I was sadly mistaken. But so I think that, the training that you provide in that virtual environment, you really have to make sure that it aligns to the mission and what folks need in their day-to-day jobs that they're getting done.
It's awesome. Perfect analogy. Love that.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think one question that I kind of have is, you kind of mentioned how the world is rapidly evolving. Could you talk a little bit about the value of deep technical knowledge, in this world where we want to make sure that you can maintain generalist skills and be able to be agile and pivot. But then there's also this tension where you do want to really, find your niche and dig in with some deep technical knowledge.
I'll add a second question to that, because I feel like there are some who believe that, it's almost like knowledge is becoming commoditized with AI, and that, anyone can build an app now, anyone can be a developer, because I think it's tough to argue that AI can replace being one of the stronger cyber experts. So yeah, curious your thoughts on that as like an add-on question.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the answer is it's not an either or, but it's a both. I see AI augmenting knowledge and maybe making it easier to access some of that deep technical knowledge. But, having really adopted AI in my business and personal use and all that stuff, I know that it gets wrong answers some of the times. And that's going to improve over time. But you need some of that deep technical knowledge, that deep understanding of, hey, what's going on here, to be able to put those answers in context, to be able to understand what's really going on. And so I think that there's always going to be a place and a need for developing that deep technical knowledge. But the speed at which things continue to evolve and change, there is equally always going to be a place for continuing to refresh and learn new skills and put the deep technical knowledge that you have in context of whatever that problem and challenge, that environment that you're facing, how that's changing. And so that's why I think that when you think about cyber training, there's a place for classroom training, really important to develop some of that fundamental understanding and that deep technical knowledge. There's a place for the high end exercises and capture the flag events, particularly where you bring teams of experts together and force them to function as a team and work together to solve a problem. But then there's also a place to just go to the gym and, continue to get the reps and sets and the experience and continue to learn by doing as you go forward. I think it really takes all of that put together to be effective in this environment today.
So how does a training manager then becomes kind of like an event planner in a way, because they have to map out all those different opportunities and resources while evaluating like how is this person progressing in like their day job? How does that people manager navigate all those different options?
I think maybe rather than an event planner, I might use the analogy that the training manager is the coach, right? I mean, they're looking across the team, and each person on the team has a different role, but they also have different skills and abilities that they bring to the table. And so that coach has really got to look across the whole of that team and figure out, what they need to accomplish as a group, what they need to accomplish as an organization, and then build up those skills and abilities. And I think that, what we found and what we tried to put in place is that platform that makes it a little bit easier for folks to do the assessments, put together a series of exercise and training evolutions that allow folks to develop their own skills. It's not an easy job by any stretch of the imagination, but it can be enabled with effective tools and effective partners.
So one thing I've been reading a lot lately about is the idea of like, building up a specific role or job into a series of like tasks that an individual needs to perform. And in the ability to perform those tasks, they need to build that on the foundation of the skills that they have and the capabilities that they have. When you're thinking about that foundational layer is probably so much further below where you are as, Rear Admiral, like when you're managing thousands of people, how do you think about like deconstructing plans to get to that foundational layer, or encouraging your, direct reports to do so?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was very fortunate and continue to be very fortunate today that there are a number of different organizations that have, deconstructed those different roles within cybersecurity and broke it down into the individual tasks. There's a specific skill set, instructional systems design, which, starts from the premise of, hey, what is it that you want to accomplish? What are the skills and abilities that a person needs to have in order to do that outcome, and then break down each one of those. And so you can go to the NICE framework pushed out by NIST that, breaks down the different work roles and then also the knowledge, skills, and abilities for each one of those work roles. Within the Department of Defense, we had the Defense Cyber Workforce, which augmented that. And then within U.S. Cyber Command, we also had a separate internal list because of some of the offensive and operational intelligence and those different functions that were unique that weren't already accounted for in either NICE or the DWCF that broke that down. So it's a challenge, but I think that, here's where you stand on the shoulder of giants, of folks that have done this previously, and crosswalk kind of, hey, this is the output that I'm looking for, or this is the output that I think I need, that aligns with this job role, which requires these knowledge, skills, and abilities. On a little bit of a sidetrack here, this actually is a really key enabler when it comes to things like mutual assistance. If you think about community that might have a school system or a government that's under cyber attack, and maybe they don't have, all the right resources in that community, and they want to ask for help, they need to know what kind of help to ask for. And so I was very fortunate to be able to partner with an organization that created these roles within the FEMA Incident Command System. It's called ICS for ICS. They took roles related to industrial control systems and typed them and put them into the Incident Command System. So if you're in Nevada and you need help from, somebody else, you can actually type and ask for the right kind of help that you need to get. It's a key enabler that helped drive response forward for big events.
Well, then I guess you could probably use a lot of those resources and assets to build the assessments you were talking about
earlier. Yeah, 100%.
I'm curious definitely to hear more about, in that coach role, how you navigate. I think this goes beyond cyber, but navigating, the dynamic between a coach and their player, or a people manager and one person. And then also that there's a lot of team dynamics. So I'm just curious what elements of that are unique when you are talking about maritime or in cyber, or just generally?
Sure. I think there's a couple of different things there. And so let me talk a little bit about the team dynamics, because this is one that I saw time and time again, and want to share with folks, that leadership really does matter. And you see that, whether you're a team player or you see that, in your coach. There's plenty of stuff in the sports world of looking at the different leadership styles between players and coaches and what matters. But let me talk for a moment about the Coast Guard Academy's cyber team. The Coast Guard Academy competes in an annual Service Cyber Academy competition every year. And the Coast Guard Academy is about 1,200 kids from freshman year all the way through senior year. Contrast that with the Naval Academy, West Point, Air Force Academy, which are about 1,200 kids in each grade. So the Coast Guard Academy is 1/4 the size of the other service academies. It just so happens that their team won first place in the nation in the Service Cyber Academy competition this year. To me, this is kind of crazy. I mean, how does this small school build such an effective team? They have a much smaller talent pool to draw from. Their major is relatively new. I was up at the academy and I asked the captain of the team, what's the key to success? And he said, a year ago we formed the team, and one of the first things that we did was we did a leadership assessment on everybody in the team. Now, everybody also got a technical assessment, and they had to do their part and practice and get up to speed technically. But he said that leadership assessment really helped them to understand each person's strengths and weaknesses, not only from a technical perspective, but from an interpersonal perspective. And it really helped them to come together as a team, so that they felt by the time they got into the fight, they were just fighting as a single unit, as a strong, tight-knit organization. It shows that a well-led, well-organized group can accomplish a tremendous amount of stuff, but it also brings that leadership perspective to this particular issue. I mean, a lot of times we tend to think of cybersecurity people as kind of individualists or highly technical people or stuff like that. But there are really important leadership roles across the board for these teams in order to be successful.
That's so cool. Really interesting story. To tap into like the maritime side of things, just given your background and everything, like what do you think it is about maritime that presents like unique cyber challenges? Is it all like intelligence related, or yeah?
So first of all, there's a couple of different things. One of the unique things about the maritime domain is the first time that hacking and hackers really came into the public consciousness. It involved a attack on a ship, right? So if we go back to 1995, there's a corporation, a big multinational corporation that's involved in oil exploration, oil trade, and they have a fleet of tankers. Their CISO, that role didn't exist, but their cybersecurity person within that corporation started this skimming worm where he was taking a percentage of the transactions of everything that was going through and rerouting it to his bank account. In order to hide that, he decided to launch another attack against the ballast system on the super tankers that this corporation operated. So the ballast is what keeps the ship upright and steady in the water. And so if you can move that ballast around, you can flip the ship. And so if it weren't for a group of crafty high school students from Stuyvesant High, led by Angelina Jolie, this would have spilled oil all around the world. But fortunately, this group of hackers or anti-hackers from the movie Hackers saved the world and prevented this environmental disaster from happening. And so that was the first time that folks realized that, hey, what is this hacking thing all about? And it happened to be a maritime issue. Now, why did it happen to be a maritime issue? I think it was probably because it was shortly after Exxon Valdez ran aground and the public saw oiled birds and oiled sea life and was really kind of horrified at corporate greed versus environmental protection and responsibility. But I think it's also because the maritime industry is just so fundamental to our way of life. Here in the US, it supports 1/4 of US GDP, $5.4 trillion annually, jobs for 1 in 7 Americans. We just don't think about it. When we go into Walmart, that toilet paper is on the shelf and paper towels are on the shelf because a ship brought it here. It's literally how we put the clothes on our back, the shoes on our feet, and in many parts of the country, the food on the table. And so this industry is so super important, and it's global, and it relies on the seamless flow of information. So those links between the ships and the headquarters are vitally important. The links between ports to ports and companies to companies are vitally important. And so they require protection. And so in 1995, I did a technical look on this. The state of the industry was such that this type of attack was plausible, but not realistic. But today, very realistic that something like this could happen. And that's why it's so important that we make sure that we protect this industry. But because this industry has been disconnected from the grid for such a long period of time, when you go out to sea, you don't think about carrying all that digital trail with you. It's been hard to change the opinions and change the understanding of folks in the industry that this really is a critical issue that needs to be addressed.
Is it more likely because there's just more software driving it and just more attack surface and more sophisticated, obviously, threats? But yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So the attack surface has gone up dramatically, and there's been a number of different things that have driven, why the attack surface has gone up. New business models, new regulations, which require constant monitoring on the ships and things like that. But at the same time, the level of sophistication of the attackers and the ability to do ransomware as a service, that changes the nature of the threat as well. And so 2024, I think, was the first year that we saw a ransomware attack affect a ship operation, but we're likely to see more and more of that going forward.
Looking back, that's super interesting. And I remember reading about how important, encryption and encoding was back in World War II even. But now obviously there's different types of intelligence and moving into threats that can impact. Yeah, I mean, this Suez Canal gets clogged up and it changes the economy globally. So yeah, I guess looking forward from a people perspective, how does the industry change? How does it change from production and also cyber?
Yeah, I think if I go back to kind of one of my earlier comments, which was, I spent a decent amount of time talking with the owners, operators of different companies and saying, hey, nobody cares more about your mission than you do. And so you really need to invest and understand this. I think initially when we're presented, at least when this industry is presented with a new risk, they tend to think of it as, hey, let me insure against that, or let me offboard it to an outside firm that's going to deal with that, or let me divest of some portion of my operation so I don't have to deal with that risk. So risk avoidance, risk transfer, that kind of stuff. And what I would say with this one is this is not something that you can transfer. It is so integral to your business. So you got to figure out how to deal with it yourself. And that's going to require you to, develop the people expertise, do the training, do the development, have them really work at this. Within the US, the Coast Guard just passed a set of regulations which are requiring maritime facilities and US maritime ships to conduct assessments, develop cybersecurity plans, do the training, do annual exercises. And so there's a path forward for getting after it. While the US is the largest market in the maritime industry, US shipping is only a fraction of a percent of the global trade. And so there's still a lot more work that needs to get done there.
When you're thinking about AI with all that, I think the way we think about it is like, productivity and, being able to get more stuff done and do more other stuff we like to do can automate a lot. But also it obviously widens, lengthens, or deepens, whatever you want to call it, the attack surface. So how do you think about that as a way to learn and be able to do jobs better, but then also to close up those expanded attack surfaces?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's exactly along those lines. You can't just put your head in the sand and pretend like it's not there and not figure out how to incorporate it into your business, because your competitors are going to figure out how to incorporate it into their business, and they're going to figure out how to do things more efficiently, more effectively, or just in a completely different way that's going to, disrupt segments of the market. And so you have to engage, but you got to engage smartly. And you got to have to address the risks. I've been very fortunate to work with another client that is large in the AI ecosystem. Let me put it that way. And they asked me to take a look at, how is AI being used in the maritime system? And today, right now, within the maritime industry, AI is largely being used to, drive additional efficiency. That you can do weather routing avoidance and improved planning for ship movements, which reduces the amount of fuel that they burn and saves you costs along the way. We haven't really seen it take over different elements of operations or fundamentally change, the way things are moving. But as AI continues to increase, I have no doubt that there's going to be some sort of operational or technological disruption, as this continues.
One other question on kind of AI related, but a little bit more focused on the people, because I love your thinking on this, is looking back again to take a history approach of like, AI is new and like, how is it going to change things going forward? I've thrown out the analogy to you before about cloud and how cloud computing changed the way we work. Probably less so the way, people worked. But I think going forward, one thing I'm interested in cyber is a very high pressure field. I'm curious what the impacts are going to be on the corporate culture, the mental health of cyber professionals who have a lot more to do, who are expected to do more with less, and who are constantly hearing how they're going to be replaced by AI. How do you see that history repeating itself and how that's going to play out?
Yeah, I've been through one fundamental change, at least one fundamental change during my lifetime. And that was when we first got desktop computers. It sounds crazy, because I know you can't imagine life without a desktop computer or a laptop. I mean, the fact that I call it a desktop computer already tells you how old I am. But what that did was that eliminated whole categories of workers. We used to have file clerks, and we used to have secretaries and typists and different folks that would do those jobs. And that was because there were, a single file room, and that's, you handed your papers off and the file clerk put it away. Or if you needed something typed, you wrote it up and took it to the typing pool and they typed it. There were a limited number of those different assets that were available. But that eliminated whole categories of job when all of that stuff was now, at everybody's desk. You no longer needed the file room. You no longer needed the typing pool, that kind of thing. We're seeing a similar thing, I think, happen now with AI, more so than I think we saw with cloud, but I could be wrong about that. I mean, you probably lost some networking and different techs that we're working on, kind of doing LANs and stuff like that. But with AI, as the father of a new computer science graduate, there's a lot less jobs for young programmers than there used to be. And so I think that, as you cast this forward, what are you going to see happening? The folks that are still in the workplace are going to have to figure out how to use AI to manage some of that workload that they have. And they're going to figure out how to use it as a tool to enable them to take care of that bulk of workload. At the same time, we're going to need, AI developers and those folks going forward. But I think to your cybersecurity professionals, instead of probably spending a lot of time writing the scripts to, do all of that data, they're going to have the AIs, write the scripts to do it. They're going to still have to have an understanding of what they need, to get from the output from that software and make sure that they can debug it and do all that stuff. So it's going to change the way that they work. I think whether or not it puts more work on them, I think you're probably right that it will put more work on them. But it's going to change the nature of the way that they work for sure.
Awesome. Well, kind of our wrap-up question, and I think you just kind of touched on a little bit of this, but if you were starting your career in cyber now, what's one thing that you would tell yourself?
That's a great question. I think the funny thing about what I would tell myself is, I always tell people when I'm giving career advice that the worst advice I ever got was from a Coast Guard admiral. I was a kid that grew up banging away on keyboards. There were a limited number of them when I grew up. And so I'd spend Saturday morning at my dad's high school cranking away on the keyboard while he was catching up on other work. And I went to the Coast Guard Academy. I was going to be a marine engineer, but figured out that those guys had to work very, very hard to complete their degree requirements. And they had this emerging computer science major, and I could do that and it would be easy. And so I took the easy path out. When I got into the Coast Guard, I figured I'd just keep writing software and keep going. We got to a point in 1993 when we were downsizing the service, making it smaller, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And a lot of folks were getting asked to leave the service. I was writing software programs at that point, and the Admiral came down to give us a pep talk. And he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to go get a master's in computer science and stay in this field." And he said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." He said, "I'm in charge of computers for the Coast Guard." He said, I don't even have one on my desk. We don't need any officers that know anything about computers. Find something else to do. Find something operational." And so like a dumb young kid, I said, "Okay, great." And went off and did something else. Now, granted, it all worked out wonderful. I had a fantastic career, and it was, I feel really blessed and fortunate. But I tell that story because I am nervous about giving myself advice now, because I worry that I don't really, as much as I think I understand kind of the trajectory of where things are going, I know that I don't really understand it. And I think that young person that's looking at this is probably seeing opportunities. I'm sure they're seeing opportunities that I don't see. And, I worry all the time about giving them the wrong advice. No, there was a kernel of wisdom in that advice that the Admiral gave me. It took me many years to find that kernel of wisdom, but there was a kernel of wisdom in there. And so I think that, I would encourage a young person today that's just starting out to really be bold and confident about their decision making, to really drive into those opportunities of how they see the world changing and really, own that opportunity and create something for themselves, create something for, the organizations that they work with. So, yeah.
Awesome. Great answer. Perfect. Well, this has been such an honor, honestly, and a privilege. It's been great to talk to you, John. Yeah, thanks again for being on the podcast, and hopefully we talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Phoebe. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Thomas, great to connect as well. Really excited for the journey that you're on. So thanks.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Cyber Talent Series. If you enjoyed the combo, make sure to subscribe on Spotify. Also follow us on YouTube and subscribe there. We'll be sharing content there as well. For ongoing tips on hiring, retaining, upskilling your cyber workforce, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and check us out at MetaCTF.com. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.